$11. Take a second and really look at that number. It's not a debt. It's not a bill you haven't paid yet. It's just what's left. It is the final, lonely survivor in your checking account after the world has taken its share. It's what remains after the rent check cleared, after the electric company took their cut, and after that $4.79 you shouldn't have spent on a stale gas station sandwich because the grocery store felt like a marathon away and you were already 15 minutes late for your second shift. $11. For most people, that's a couple of coffees. For you, in this moment, it is the thin, fragile line between staying afloat and drowning. It is the weight of your history. Your grandmother lived her entire life with a balance that looked exactly like that. Your mother did, too. And her mother before her, a woman who spent 41 grueling years standing on a concrete floor in a textile plant in rural Georgia, only to retire with a bad knee and a savings account that topped out at $6,200. In your family, nobody ever talked about building money. You didn't grow wealth. You spoke about money the way farmers speak about a drought or a hurricane. It was something that happened to you. It was an external force, often hostile, and your only job was to survive it until the sun came up the next day. And then there's you. You're sitting in the driver's seat of a 2008 Honda Civic. The dashboard has a long, jagged crack running through the center of it like a lightning bolt. The air conditioner hums a high-pitched note of protest, and there is $11 in your account. You are staring at your phone, trying to make the math make sense, trying to figure out how a person like you, with a family like yours, ever gets to a place where they aren't afraid of the mailman. This is where the story actually starts. It doesn't start with a success montage. It doesn't start with a highlight reel of you walking into a glass-walled office. It starts right here in a cold parking lot, in the dark, with $11. There is a specific kind of internal scarring that comes from growing up in a house where money is a source of shame. It isn't loud. It doesn't show up as a dramatic diagnosis. It shows up in the way your shoulders instinctively hunch when a friend asks if you want to go out for dinner. It shows up in the way you lie efficiently and quickly about why you're too busy to join the group trip, when the truth is you don't even have the gas money to get to the airport. It shows up in the small, weird luxuries. Like when you finally get a tiny bit of extra cash and you go to the store and buy the name brand cereal. Not because you can taste the difference, but because for 5 minutes, sitting at your kitchen table, you need to feel like a person who can afford the box with the bright colors. It's 2011. You are 23 years old. You're living in a one-bedroom apartment in Columbus, Ohio, with a roommate named Deshaun. The place has that permanent smell of old carpet, generic cleaning supplies, and the cooking smells of 12 other families drifting through the vents. You work as a data entry clerk for a mid-sized insurance firm on the east side of town. You make $31,400 a year. To some people, that sounds like a start. To you, it feels like a cage. After taxes, after the $215 car payment for the Civic, after your $640 share of the rent, and the $187 student loan payment that feels like paying a fine for a crime you didn't commit, you have maybe $340 left for the month. That's for food. That's for clothes. That's for the check engine light that you've been ignoring for 3 weeks. This is your baseline. This is where your math starts. And here is the truth that the wealth gurus never tell you: when you are the first person in your bloodline to try and build real wealth, you aren't starting at zero. You are starting in a hole. You are 40 feet underground. The people who raised you loved you. They did their best. But they didn't have any financial wisdom to give you because they never had any extra to practice with. They didn't pass down stock tips, they passed down survival instincts. They taught you how to stretch a pound of ground beef. They taught you how to pay cash for everything because credit felt like a trap. They taught you to never trust a bank you couldn't walk into and yell at. Useful advice for staying alive? Yes. Wealth building advice? Not even close. Nobody ever explained compound interest to you in a way that didn't sound like a math problem from a textbook. Nobody told you what a Roth IRA was or why it mattered that you start at 22 instead of 32. In your world, the only investment conversation you ever heard was your Uncle Raymond explaining why he kept $4,000 in a fireproof box under his floorboards because the government takes everything anyway. At 23, with $11 in your pocket, you are at the most honest point of your life. You have no safety net. You have no roadmap. You just have the cracked dashboard and the cold air. The real shift, the moment the trajectory of your entire life actually changed, didn't happen when you got a promotion. It didn't happen because of a book. It happened on a Tuesday night in March of 2012. You were 24. You sat down at your small, chipped kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a cheap calculator. For the first time in your life, you stopped guessing. You stopped feeling like you were broke and decided to see exactly how broke you were. You wrote down everything. Gross income, $2,616 a month. Then you started the subtractions. Rent. Utilities. Insurance. The $45 you spent on beer because you were stressed. The $12 you spent on a movie. When you got to the bottom of the page, you stared at the number for a long time. $73. That was it. $73 of true discretionary income. That was your freedom. That was what was left after the life you'd built so far finished eating everything else. You didn't feel inspired. You felt sick. There is a very specific kind of nausea that comes with seeing the absolute truth written in your own handwriting. Before the legal pad, you could still lie to yourself. You could say, "Oh, it's just a bad month," or "I'll catch up next week." The legal pad killed the lie. It said, "This is your actual life. Now, what are you going to do?" This is the first rule. Real, bloodline-changing wealth starts with brutal, ugly clarity. Most people never get rich because they are too afraid to look at the number. They keep the lights off because they don't want to see the mess. You looked at it. You stared at that $73 until it felt real. And then you made a decision that felt small at the time but would change everything. You decided to stop spending that $73 and start treating it like the first brick of a house. It takes you 19 months to save your first $10,000. That sounds like a short time when you say it fast, but living it is a different story. It is 19 months of packing a peanut butter sandwich every single day while your coworkers go out for Chipotle. It is 19 months of calling Deshaun's cousin Marcus to fix your car because Marcus will do it for the cost of the parts if you help him hold the flashlight. It is 19 months of saying no. No to the concerts. No to the weekend trips to the lake. No to the birthday dinner at the place downtown where the menu doesn't have prices on the website. You tell your friends you're tired, or you're busy, or you're feeling under the weather. You become a ghost in your own social circle because you can't afford the entry fee to your old life. Then, you get a small raise. $2,200 a year. It's not much, but for the first time in your life, you don't spend it. You pretend the raise never happened. You keep living on the old salary and you shovel the difference into the dark. On February 14, 2014, you're in the break room at work. The microwave is humming, and the air smells like burnt popcorn. You open your banking app. $10,247. You don't cheer. You don't tell anyone. You just sit there, very still, and feel this weird sensation of vertigo. It's like the ground under your feet, the ground that has been shaking since you were a kid, suddenly went solid. Your grandmother never saw $10,000 in one place in her entire life. You know, because you helped her sort her mail when she got sick, and her big savings account was $3,400. You are 26 years old, and you have just crossed a threshold your entire family tree never even touched. It doesn't feel like you're rich. It feels like you finally climbed out of the hole and reached the starting line. For the first time, the math feels like it might actually work. You don't quit the insurance company. You just get better at being there. By 28, you've been promoted twice. You're making $54,000. You're still driving the Civic, though the crack in the dash has grown a little longer. This is when you meet Priya. Priya is a senior auditor. She is a small, quiet woman who drives a 7-year-old Toyota Camry and eats the same salad every day. She doesn't wear expensive clothes, and she doesn't talk about hustle. One afternoon, she sees you looking at a finance blog on your lunch break. She tells you, in the same flat tone she uses to talk about the weather, you're leaving free money on the table. Open a Roth IRA. Put the max in. Don't think about it. Just do it. She walks away before you can even ask her what a Roth IRA is. That night, you stay up until 2 a.m. reading. You learn about index funds. You learn that you don't need to be a wolf of Wall Street to build wealth. You just need to be boring. You need to be consistent. The market doesn't care about your trauma. It doesn't care that you grew up with $11. It doesn't care about your why. It just compounds. By the time you turn 32, your net worth crosses $100,000. Crossing $100,000 is a different feeling than crossing $10,000. It's quieter. It's more internal. You realize that the machine is now running partly on its own. In a good month, your investments earn more than your grandfather made in a whole year at the bottling plant. And you didn't have to lift a finger for it. That's the second rule. The first $100,000 is 90% behavior and 10% math. The second $100,000 is 60% behavior and 40% math. Eventually, the ratio flips. At some point, the money starts working harder than you do. Most people quit before the flip happens. They quit when it's still all behavior and no visible progress. You didn't quit because you remembered how the $11 felt. Here is the part they don't put in the motivational videos. Here is the part that gets edited out because it doesn't get likes. When the money starts to become real, not just emergency fund real, but life-changing real, you get quiet. And the people you grew up with start to feel that quiet. You're 34. Your net worth is $280,000. You're at a family cookout back in Columbus. It's the same house, the same folding chairs, the same smell of charcoal and cheap cigarettes. Your cousin Ellis is there. Ellis has a business idea. He needs $15,000 to get it off the ground. He doesn't ask you for it directly, but he spends 45 minutes talking at you, looking for a nod, looking for a sign that you're going to be the savior. You have $280,000. You could write the check right now and not even feel it. But you've also watched what happened when Aunt Renee gave a loan to your other cousin, and how that loan turned into a decade of resentment and awkward holidays. You've learned that money changes the architecture of a family. You don't give Ellis the money. You spend the next 6 weeks feeling like a traitor. You feel like you've forgotten where you came from. Nobody tells you that guilt is a tax you have to pay when you're the first one to cross the line. You are standing on one side of a canyon, and the people you love are on the other, and there is no bridge. You can't drag them across. You tried that with smaller amounts of money in your 20s, and it never worked. The isolation is real. It's heavy. And it never fully goes away. At some point, for you, it was around $400,000, you look in the mirror and realize you don't know who the person looking back at you is. You're getting dressed for a meeting. You have a paid-off car. You have a brokerage account. You are maxing out your 401k. You are planning for a future that literally didn't exist in your imagination when you were 10 years old. But underneath the nice shirt, you are still the kid who ate free lunch at school and hoped the teacher wouldn't call on him. You are still the 23-year-old with $11. These two people live in the same body, and they are constantly at war. The scarcity version of you still flinches when the grocery bill is $150. You still feel like a criminal if you buy a plane ticket that isn't the absolute cheapest option. You still find yourself walking toward the store brand milk even though the 40-cent difference doesn't matter to your bottom line anymore. And then there's the wealthy version of you. You're at dinner with people who have always had money. Someone mentions a $5,000 expense like it's a rounding error, and you realize you didn't flinch. That lack of reaction scares you. You're afraid that the money is stripping away your humanity, that it's making you forget the value of a dollar. The third rule: the conflict doesn't end. You don't arrive at a place where you feel perfectly comfortable being rich. You just learn to hold both versions of yourself at once. You let the poor kid keep you humble, and you let the wealthy adult keep building the wall. It's October 2023. You are 35. You're in your own apartment, an apartment you own, in a neighborhood your grandmother would have called fancy with a hint of suspicion in her voice. It's nearly midnight. The city is quiet. You open your laptop. You pull up every account. The checking. The high-yield savings. The Roth IRA Priya told you to open. The 401k from the insurance company that you rolled over. The brokerage account you've been feeding like a hungry animal for a decade. The equity in your home. You add it all up. $1,847,000. You are 35 years old and you are a millionaire. The feeling isn't what you thought it would be. It's not popping champagne. It's something closer to awe. And underneath the awe, there is a profound sense of responsibility. You realize this number isn't just yours. This number belongs to every person in your family tree who worked themselves into the ground and never saw the fruit. It belongs to your mother, who cried in the car after the grocery store because the math didn't work. It belongs to your grandfather at the bottling plant. You didn't get here because you were better than them. You got here because they gave you enough of a foundation to reach for something they couldn't even see. You close the laptop. You sit in the dark for a long time. You realize you aren't done yet. You don't cross $10 million on a dramatic day with a fireworks display. It happens the way most big things happen, slowly, then all at once. The market has a historic run. A business venture you invested in at 37 finally pays out. You make a real estate play in 2026 that looks like genius in the rearview mirror but was really just the same yellow legal pad math you've been doing for 15 years. You are 41 years old. You check the numbers. $10,340,000. You pour a cup of coffee. You stand at the window. This is the part where the script is supposed to tell you that you're finally free. And you are. You never have to worry about a light bill again. You never have to look at the price of a sandwich. But freedom is more complex than a bank balance. Real freedom from financial fear is hard to achieve when you've spent 20 years using that fear as fuel. The fear kept you sharp. It kept you disciplined. Now that the fear is gone, you have to find a new reason to get out of bed. The wealth was the person you had to become to get there. It was the 19 months of peanut butter sandwiches. It was the $73 bricks. It was the no you said to Ellis. It was the consistency. It was the ability to stand in the middle of a family history defined by not enough and decide that it was going to stop with you. Here is what actually changes when you become the first in your bloodline to hit $10 million. Your children will never know what it feels like to sit in a parking lot with $11. They won't start 40 feet underground. They will start at the starting line. It's not a guarantee that they'll be successful, but it is a guarantee that they won't have to survive the drought before they can start planting the seeds. You are the bridge. You are the one who took the $11 and turned it into a new baseline for everyone who comes after you. You take a sip of your coffee. Outside, the city is waking up. Somewhere, right now, there is a 23-year-old sitting in a car with a cracked dashboard and $11 in their account. They just picked up a yellow legal pad. Their story is just beginning.